but it is remarkable that it chimes with what the founder of modern economic theory said already in the 18th century. Quote, "Little else is requisite to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence from the lowest barbarism, but peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice, all the rest being brought about by the natural course of things." End quote. That was, of course, Adam Smith. And by tolerable administration of justice, I think he meant our modern expression of rule of law. In Poland, communism collapsed in 1989, and since then we were able to transform our country from a command economy to a free economy. And over the last 35 years, Poland has successfully employed the advice of Adam Smith. As a result, according to the IMF, Poland, which in the 1990s was ranked globally in the 5th 10, this year has moved to the 20th place. Poland is thus ranked second in the world as far as GDP change between 1990 and 2020 is concerned, yielding only to the People's Republic of China. Therefore, we believe we have a good story to tell, and therefore we believe that Central and Eastern Europe deserves a more prominent place in the United Nations system and other global governance fora. As the biggest economy in our region, 20th largest in the world, as I've already mentioned, Poland is ready to represent Central and Eastern Europe in these fora, in particular in the G20, where the region is absent. We have already had the honor of contributing to the G20 work on the invitation of previous presidencies, Germany, India, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Indonesia. We also have participated in the endeavors of South Africa's presidency, proudly representing the European Union as its council presidency. We are grateful to the United States for the invitation to working together in the G20 framework in 2026 and for the invitation issued to our president to attend the summit in Florida. We are ready to actively contribute to it at both political and working level, and we hope that this invitation will finally transform into Poland's permanent presence in the G20. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Poland. We will now make the only and one exception to the head of international organizations because of other pressing challenges that she has to attend to now. The WTO, Ms. Ngozi Ongojo Luela, the Director-General, you now have the floor.
Thank you so much, Minister Lamola. Excellencies, I want to thank South Africa for inviting us to join you here and to make these remarks. I also want to take the opportunity to thank all the ministers who've talked about the importance of multilateral trade and the WTO as exemplified by Norway and Singapore. The global trading system stands at an inflection point, the most critical in nearly 80 years. This multilateral trading system was never just about trade. It was created above all to help prevent war. Having witnessed now how a closed and divided world economy fueled depression, conflict, and ultimately the Second World War, the architects resolved to build an open and integrated world economy instead. Trade would deliver shared prosperity, interdependence would give nations a stake in one another's success. Rules would underpin stability and trust. The antidote to the zero-sum or really negative-sum policies of the 1930s was the recognition that national interests would be better served by positive-sum cooperation. And it worked pretty well. For nearly 80 years, the world has experienced unprecedented prosperity and relative peace. But success can breed complacency. I think we took open trade for granted and we failed to adapt the system to the rapid changes in the global economy it had helped to create. Many WTO members have tabled complaints, including successive U.S. administrations, and some of these complaints are valid. Imbalances in liberalization commitments, failure to address unfair trading practices, the dispute settlement system. Developing countries feel the system is not delivering well enough for them and integrating them better, giving them policy space to develop and grow. So this crisis must be a catalyst for reform. Reform means modernizing the rule book. It means ensuring consensus decision-making, which we treasure, does not become a recipe for paralysis. It means restoring a faster, more effective dispute settlement system. Above all, it means widening the circle of countries that participate in and benefit from global trade, achieving true interdependence in trade, not overdependence, as we see in some cases now. In this regard, China's announcement 2 days ago that it will henceforth forgo access to special and differential treatment, some of the privileges accorded to developing countries at the WTO, is most welcome and helps to open the door to reform. Now, many of you have said that the trading system matters enormously, and so does the WTO. So let me end with some positive news, that in spite of the tariff actions we've seen recently, nearly 72% or 3/4 of world's goods trade still continues to go on under WTO rules. Services and digital trade continues to expand. For the overwhelming majority of economies, open and rules-based trade is not a choice, it's a necessity. In the end, the WTO reflects nothing more and nothing less than the willingness of its members to cooperate. Reforming the multilateral trading system and the WTO will need strong political will, and that will essentially needs to come from you, Excellencies, the leaders of the organization. Whether this system ultimately is reformed or the status quo continues to hold is up to you, and I know you'll do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General of the WTO. We will now adjourn for lunch from now up until 3 o'clock. And when we return, we will continue with our speakers list, which is available on the link to the live list of the UN members and international organizations that are present. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for the first session or the first segment. We are now adjourning. Thank you.
Som udgangspunkt, så det er også mere, jeg holder ikke til at stå sådan en time. Så skal jeg underbue. Nej, jeg har faktisk ikke noget sådan.
To til 13. Ja, jeg ved ikke, om jeg har hørt, hvordan vi gør med lyden. Ja, men vi prøver også at booke lyden på spor 2 på live 3, fordi vi har kun én mikrofon til 4 mennesker. Så hvis lyden er lidt dårlig på spor 1, så prøver vi på spor 2 på live 3. Der prøver vi også at booke den.
Den er S2. Sådan nu.
Dalsgaards lyd bliver på spor 1 på live 2, fordi hun har min online.
Jeg hører ikke den besked.
Skal jeg lige sige til dig, når jeg kan høre, at de er på vej nu ad gangen?
Det er ikke det ting, vi gør nu. Kommer det? 5 minutter. Godt nok.
Ja.
Kan du bruge det?
Ja, men jeg siger bare lige til dig, når jeg kan høre dem.
Det kan man i hvert fald. Jeg har sådan en roller, hvis der er til mikrofonen.
Ritzau.
Ja.
Kan du godt gå ud af billedet der?
Ja.
Tak.
Der er ikke en ro over den anden.
Det var godt, du ikke så, hvor hurtigt det kørte derhen.
Ej, det er i hvert fald god tv. Så jeg har haft at snakke om.
Ja, man kan sige, modsat tidligere, hvor vi har hørt minister til pressemøde, så er det nu dem, der har efterretningerne, og dem, der sidder med efterforskningen. Så derfor bliver det jo et noget andet pressemøde. Jeg håber derfor også, at vi kan blive en lille smule klogere på det, som Mads Korsager nævner. Nemlig, hvad er det, der står på deres notesblok, for de må have et eller andet. De er sikre på, at det var et hybrid anslag. Det siger man meget sådan stålfast. Og så siger man jo også, at man er sikker på, at det var droner, man har observeret flere steder i Danmark. Så jeg håber, vi bliver klogere på det, når de kommer lige om lidt. Jeg ved, at alle parter er ankommet her til Rigspolitiets lokaler. Ja, jeg kan høre, at nu kommer de.
Ja, velkommen til Rigspolitiet, og velkommen til den her fælles myndighedsbriefing. Vi har haft nogle hektiske døgn bag os, og vi har muligvis også endnu en travl aften og nat foran os. Så jeg vil gøre den her introduktion relativt kort. Med i dag er forsvarschefen, og så cheferne for de 2 efterretningstjenester, politiets efterretningstjeneste og forsvarets efterretningstjeneste. Og vi er her for at forsøge at svare nogle af de spørgsmål, som jeg er sikker på, at I sidder med i lyset af de begivenheder, der har været i de seneste dage. Det er jo selvfølgelig helt oplagt, at de forstyrrelser, vi har haft af lufttrafikken og luftfarten i de seneste døgn, ikke er en acceptabel situation. Men det er også klart, at det er en svær problemstilling, og at hybride virkemidler sjældent kan afmonteres med nogle få, enkle og simple greb, hverken civile eller militære. Derfor så er det selvfølgelig også vigtigt, at det er de samlede kapaciteter, myndighedernes samlede kapaciteter, vi sætter ind for at håndtere problemet, uanset om det er på efterretningsfronten, på vidensfronten, eller det er på indsatsfronten i politi og militær. Det er samlede kapaciteter, vi har til rådighed. Det er samlede kapaciteter, vi bruger i den her indsats. Vi har selvfølgelig løftet i politiet i dag vores beredskabsniveauer for at tilpasse vores indsats bedre til den situation, som vi står overfor. Men jeg vil også sige meget klart, at jeg tænker også, at der bliver en situation at håndtere fremadrettet. Det tror jeg er relativt klart, og det er vi selvfølgelig forberedt på, og noget af det, vi vil fortælle lidt om i dag, det er selvfølgelig, hvordan gør vi det. Og derfor så har vi selvfølgelig også mulighed for at tage lidt spørgsmål i dag, men det er også klart, og jeg er også nødt til at sige, at det vil ikke være alt og alle oplysninger, vi kan dele med jer i dag omkring myndighedsindsatsen. Der vil være nogle oplysninger, som vi af helt åbenlyse årsager er nødt til at holde for os selv. Men så få introduktionsbemærkninger vil jeg give, og så vil jeg give ordet videre til forsvarschefen. Værsgo.
Tak for det. Der taler om en samlet kapacitet, som vi har, som indsættes i opgaveløsningen, og det gøres efter de operative behov og de prioriterede behov, som vi har. Vi kan ikke være overalt i Danmark hele tiden. Over de sidste par dage, og især i nat, der har vi haft observationer af droner også på forsvarets faciliteter. Det betyder, at opgaven også for forsvaret har ændret sig i omfang og karakter. Rigtig mange erfaringer har vi så derved indhentet som forsvarets soldater og medarbejdere. De har arbejdet på at indarbejde i løbet af denne dag. Når der er flere medarbejdere, der er indarbejdet i opgaveløsningen, herunder medarbejdere, der ikke normalt tager sig af antidroneoperationer, så har det været meget vigtigt at få sendt budskabet helt ud til de spidse ender, at der er handlepligt, og at bemyndigelsen er klar. Vi kan nedtage droner og skal nedtage droner, hvis det er det, der er muligt, uden at sætte selvfølgelig civilbefolkning sikkerhed over styr. I de videre dage der er det selvfølgelig fortsætte udviklingen af vores counter-drone-kapacitet. Det handler om beredskabet, det handler om kapaciteten, det handler om teknologien og hvordan vi bruger den, og det handler om erfaringerne. Blandt andet derfor så rækker vi jo løbende ud til allierede, også tætte allierede, og får de erfaringer ind i vores opgaveløsning. Og det fortsætter vi selvfølgelig med. Dertil så skal jeg gennemgå situationen her i Danmark med Jaishankar om et øjeblik.
Tak for det, Michael. Thomas?
Ja, jamen jeg vil lige kort fortælle lidt om, hvor vi står i forhold til vurdering af, hvad det er for en aktør, der står bag. Og det første og det vigtigste for mig at sige, det er, at det ved vi faktisk endnu ikke. Det bliver der selvfølgelig arbejdet løbende på med alle de midler, vi nu har til det. Og det arbejde pågår. Mere generelt, så tror jeg, det er vigtigt at understrege, at vi jo står i en alvorlig sikkerhedspolitisk situation. Siden Ukrainekrigen brød ud, set Rusland udvise stadig større risikovillighed i forhold til at anvende hybride midler, i forhold til hybrid krigsførelse, om man vil. Og den risikovillighed har været stigende. Det har vi set i 2024, det har vi set igen i år, og de seneste ugers begivenheder har understreget det med al tydelighed. Så vi står i en alvorlig situation. Vi må også forvente fremover, at det vil gøre sig gældende. Når det er sagt, så er det igen vigtigt for mig at understrege, at vi ikke har oplysninger, der tillader os at pege på, hvem det er, der står bag de seneste dages begivenheder.
Tak for det, Thomas. Fint, værsgo.
Ja, tak. Jeg vil starte der, hvor Thomas slap. Vi står i en meget alvorlig sikkerhedspolitisk situation. Det er der ingen tvivl om. Det gælder i hele Europa, det gælder også i Danmark. Jeg vil også gentage det, Thomas har sagt, at vi har ikke oplysninger, der gør, at vi kan sætte navn på en aktør. Men vi kan sige, at det her det ligner en model for hybrid krigsførelse, som vi har set andre steder i Europa. Jeg minder om, som nogle af jer selvfølgelig ved, at vi vurderer, at risikoen for russisk spionage i Danmark er høj. Og vi vurderer også, at risikoen for russisk sabotage er høj. Det har vi set andre steder i Europa, det må vi også forvente at kunne se i Danmark. Og det er klart, at tjenesterne ser begivenhederne.
Mediation and inclusive governance remain the strongest tools, but they require resources and political will. By supporting mediators, empowering local peace builders, and fostering inclusive processes, we can address the root causes of conflict before violence takes hold. Third, confronting the climate crisis. Integrating climate risk into peace and development strategies prevents shocks from becoming breakdowns. Regional cooperation on water, food, early warning lowers tension and curbs displacement. Climate adaptation creates jobs and brings stability, protecting populations. And fourth, making finance deliver for peace and prosperity. From prevention to climate action, progress depends on access to affordable, timely, and long-term financing and the reduction of the cost of capital. When borrowing costs fall and fiscal space widens, governments can invest in development and resilience and prevent crises. That makes us all safer. Excellencies, peace is not a dividend of development. It is its foundation and highest return investment. Financial justice is not an aspiration. It is a requirement for global stability. Let us work together to reaffirm peace as the surest path to sustainable economic development, and multilateralism, the anchor of a safer, fairer future for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. The President of the General Assembly is not going to make this session. She sends her regards to the SG and also to the President. It will now conclude this session, the opening segment of our meeting. I would like to ask you to remain in your seats as President Ramaphosa, the Secretary General of the UN, leave the meeting. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies.
Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. As the Excellencies are leaving the room, we move there. Brazil and the US. Yeah. It's US, yeah? Thank you. We will now invite the other two Troika members to come forward, Brazil and the United States. Yes. No, it's a charger. It's fine. Yeah. Thank you very much. Before opening the floor and doing my opening remarks, allow me to do some housekeeping. Consistent with the G20 practice, the Troika members, Brazil and the United States of America, will speak first. They will be followed by the other G20 members in alphabetical order, according to the English name of each country or organization. The guest countries of the South Africa's G20 presidency will follow suit. Subsequently, I will give the floor to the other UN member states, permanent observers represented at a ministerial level, and heads of other international organizations present at this meeting, wishing to speak, in accordance with the list circulated to all participants and available through the web link provided by the Secretariat. I would like to ask everyone's cooperation in strictly observing the 3 minutes time limit for interventions of states and 2 minutes of heads of international organizations. As Brazil will take the floor as a member of the Troika for the first time in this meeting, it will have 5 minutes to deliver a statement, followed by the US. The rest is in accordance with the minutes I've announced. As we have a very long list of countries wishing to intervene in our meeting, keeping your speeches within this time limit is very important and will be much appreciated by all. Lastly, all speakers are invited to send their statements to the Secretariat for both purposes of translations and records. I will start with my own opening remark and statement, which will be followed by Brazil and the US. Honorable Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the G20 members, Honorable Ministers of Foreign Affairs of invited guest countries, Honorable fellow Foreign Ministers of UN members and permanent observers, G20 Sherpas and Shoe Sherpas, heads of international organizations, distinguished guests, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me once again to welcome you all to the second G20 Foreign Ministers meeting under South Africa's presidency of the group. It is both an honor and a privilege for South Africa to be hosting this meeting here at the United Nations headquarters, as it celebrates the 80th anniversary of its founding. 8 years since its establishment, the United Nations remain most central in the collective global efforts towards addressing global challenges and the threats to peace and security, addressing poverty and underdevelopment, and ensuring the protection of human rights. Let me from the onset state that South Africa, the United Nations General Assembly, with its universal representations, where every country participates on an equal footing, is and will always remain the chief deliberative, policy-making, and representative organ of the United Nations in every sphere, including in global economic governance. We acknowledge the complementary role of the G20 in these efforts. Honorable Ministers, South Africa's presidency of the G20 is centered on the theme solidarity, equality, and sustainability, as our President Cyril Ramaphosa has already stated, which is premised on the belief that only in collaboration, partnership, and cooperation can we address the collective challenges facing the world. The theme of today's meeting, the United Nations at 80, reaffirming peace as a path to sustainable development, is one that encapsulates the spirit, purposes, and principles of the UN Charter and what it represents: cooperation, dialogue, prosperity, and solidarity. This is a concept to which we as the global community must aspire, and where the G20 together with the United Nations must take collective action. In an international environment plagued by ills of poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment, rising geopolitical tensions and increasing conflicts, environmental devastation, escalating trade tensions, and growing threats to multilateral cooperation, we must work together to ensure our aspirations of peaceful and a prosperous society. Peace and development have always been interdependent. Without peace, there can be no sustainable development. Similarly, investments in economic development and inclusive growth can contribute to a more peaceful environment. As the global community, investment in peace and collective collaboration are crucial necessities for growth, stability, and sustainable development. For societies, livelihoods, and economies to thrive, the shifting global dynamics must be met with more and not less global cooperation. Revitalize multilateralism, enhance efforts in addressing inequalities, and increase investments in inclusive, sustainable development where no one is left behind. These collective actions are essential in fostering lasting peace and stability. History has proven more than once that a fair, transparent, and inclusive rules-based international order is an essential requirement for economic stability and for sustained growth. Multilateral cooperation is our only hope for overcoming unprecedented challenges, including slow, uneven growth, rising debt burdens, persistent poverty, and inequality. We must foster international cooperation for a peaceful world towards sustainable development. We need to strengthen cooperation and rebuild trust in multilateralism. Excellencies, in our collective goal is to achieve sustainable development. The G20, together with the United Nations, must be in sync and complementary in its actions and efforts towards a more prosperous world and addressing our shared challenges. We must work together to shape a more inclusive and sustainable global economy. In order to do this, amongst others, we need to be more robust in multilateralism and renewed commitment to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. Trust in multilateral institutions has dwindled due in part to not delivering on inclusive and sustainable growth for all. The global financial system must be made fit for purpose to change the current trajectory in financing sustainable development, including by ensuring debt sustainability for low-income countries. We must address challenges in the multilateral trading system, ensuring that it is inclusive, predictable, and governed by a rules-based system. We also need to foster inclusivity and reduce inequality if we are to leave no one behind. Lastly, we need to adhere to and uphold international law towards a more stable and fair international order. These are only some of the efforts we need to undertake. As the G20 and the United Nations, we need to seize every opportunity to raise ambition and harness collective action for a peaceful and a prosperous world. As I conclude, let me reiterate that South Africa's upcoming G20 Leaders Summit will send a clear signal that the G20 stands united behind a strong UN at the center of multilateralism, and we will endeavor to take steps to resolve global challenges while strengthening international relations and cooperations within a rules-based system. I will now hand over to the members of the G20 to deliver their interventions, starting with the Troika, Brazil, and thereafter the United States of America, followed by the G20 members in English alphabetical order, as I have already stated, and invited guest countries also in alphabetical order. Honorable Minister Mario Vieira, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil, you now have the floor.
Your Excellency Minister Ronald Lamola, Your Excellencies Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the G20 members and invited countries, distinguished permanent representatives, ladies and gentlemen, allow me first of all to thank South Africa for organizing the second G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in 2025 here at the United Nations, building upon the initiative of the Brazilian G20 presidency in 2024. When Brazil organized this event for the first time exactly 1 year ago, the idea was to combine the relevance of G20 on international economic cooperation with the importance of the UN as the center of international multilateral system. It's a pleasant development to see this view taking root. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme chosen for the South African G20 presidency this year, Solidarity, Equality and Sustainability, highlights the connection between individuals, society and the environment. We commend South Africa's focus on inclusive economic growth with an emphasis on employment, fighting inequality and promoting industrialization. I would also like to commend South Africa for choosing food security as one of the main themes in its G20 presidency. Hunger and poverty remain among the greatest challenges faced by humanity in the 21st century. This is unacceptable. To face this problem with concrete measures, the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty was launched at the G20 Leaders Summit held in Rio de Janeiro last November. As of now, the initiative has gathered 198 members, with all G20 members as well as international organizations and financial institutions. On behalf of the Brazilian government, I extend my gratitude to all those present that have supported the alliance since its inception. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2024, while the global economy grew by 3.2%, military expenditures surged by 9.4%, reaching 2.7 trillion. Meanwhile, official development assistance fell by 7.41% that same year. By fueling conflicts and perpetuating cycles of violence and inequality, excessive military expenditures undermine the very foundations of the just, security and peaceful world we seek to build. Brazil strongly opposes the use of military force to solve disputes. To counter this, we must strengthen global cooperation. As outlined in our G20 call to action on global governance reform adopted last year in this very meeting, the international system should be based on the UN Charter and international law, with modernized institutions and fairer representation that reflects today's world. As we witness the proliferation of deliberate attacks on the United Nations and international law, the very foundations of the multilateral order agreed upon 1945 are at an unprecedented risk. Therefore, those who reject the rule of force must stand together and send a strong message to commitment to the purpose of principles of the UN Charter. In celebrating the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, we must recommit to the Charter's purpose and principles and reflect on how to make this organization more capable to deliver on these foundational objectives. We now need a fit-for-purpose United Nations whose actions and initiatives are firmly grounded on the notion that can be no sustainable development without peace and no peace without sustainable development. This crisis in multilateralism is also evident in the current situation of the World Trade Organization. The paralysis of its dispute settlement mechanism has allowed for further trade fragmentation and the proliferation of unilateral measures, some of which being used in attempts to interfere in trades. On the negotiation pillar, core areas of interest for developing countries are yet to be addressed. The refounding of WTO is urgent, and Brazil is working on a proposal that we hope will be able to foster this debate. The full engagement of the international community is essential to face these challenges and build a multilateral system that is fair, inclusive, and effective. Ladies and gentlemen, during our G20 presidency in 2024, Brazil worked hard to address such key global issues, as well as to enact concrete contributions to helping alleviate hunger, poverty, and inequality, securing climate financing, and supported the much-needed reforms of global governance architecture. I am confident that we will be able to considerably step up our efforts and once again deliver tangible results given the robust priorities set out by South Africa's G20 presidency. I thank you.
Thank you very much, my dear brother, Mario Vieira. We'll now give the floor to the United States of America, Ms. Alison Hooker, the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. You now have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. It's my distinct honor to address you today on behalf of the United States. As a founding member of the United Nations and principal member of the G20, the United States believes deeply in the promise of our international institutions. As President Trump said just this week, the United Nations has such tremendous potential, but it is not even coming close to living up to that potential. One reason is that these institutions have drifted far from their original mandates. We no longer focus on what we set out to accomplish. That is why we believe it is time to get back to basics, returning to the core principles that inspired the creation of these institutions in the first place. For the G20, this mission is both straightforward and essential. This forum was established to promote economic growth and financial stability among the world's largest economies. Its purpose was to confront pressing global economic challenges and to create the conditions for prosperity. That is a tall but worthy task, one that demands clarity, focus, and discipline. Unfortunately, in recent years, the G20 has drifted. Too often, its agenda has expanded into areas well beyond its core remit. Instead of elevating urgent global economic matters through a consensus-based approach, the G20 has become entangled in debates over every political wedge issue of the day, whether on gender-responsive budgeting, nation building, or pandemic surveillance. Let me be clear. Expanding the G20's scope in this way does not strengthen the forum. It dilutes it and undermines our ability to deliver on our most basic responsibilities. As we prepare for the Leaders' Summit in November, the Trump administration urges all G20 members to return to first principles and restore this body to its rightful place as a global platform for economic cooperation. And as the incoming G20 president, the United States will champion this back-to-basics approach. Allow me to highlight 3 ways our presidency will differ from recent ones. First, we will re-center the G20 on its core economic mission. We will not spend hours debating out-of-touch social initiatives disconnected from growth and stability. Instead, we will concentrate on priorities that directly strengthen our economies and benefit our citizens. In other words, no diversity, equity, and inclusion or gender-responsive budgeting. Second, we will streamline the G20's processes. We will reduce the proliferation of working groups, cut back on bureaucratic excess, and sharpen our lines of effort. The goal is simple: to make our time together more efficient and more closely aligned with the forum's founding mandate. Third, we will focus on outcomes. The G20 was created to build resilience and stability in the global economy, not to produce lofty declarations that sit on a shelf. As President Trump reminded us earlier this week, empty words don't solve war. nor do they put food on people's tables. Next year, under President Trump's leadership, the G20 will work to deliver real outcomes, not just statements. In this spirit, the United States looks forward to working with each of you to renew the G20's role as an anchor of international economic cooperation. Together, we can deliver growth, stability, and prosperity for our nations and for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my dear sister. We will now move to the segment where it's 3 minutes each. And as we have already stated, request colleagues to stick to their 3 minutes. The African Union, Ambassador Tete Antonio, the chairperson of the African Union Executive Council and Minister of External Relations of Angola.
Thank you, Chair. I will try to stick to the 5 minutes for speaking for 54. Thank you, my dear brother, Minister Ronald Lamola, the Troika, and the Excellencies, all protocol observed. The African Union would like to praise and commend the South African G20 presidency that has further elevated the Africa's priorities to the world, which actually resonates very well with those of the Global South. This momentum builds on the foundations laid by the previous G20 presidencies, Indonesia, India, and Brazil. We look, therefore, forward to advancing these shared priorities during the upcoming U.S. G20 presidency as well. In this spirit, I wish to reiterate the African Union's commitment to the G20 and its processes, as this reflects our member states' commitment to multilateralism. This commitment is in line with our desire to strengthen our international partnerships and our aspiration to make Africa as a strong and influential global partner, as captured in the AU Agenda 2063. Chair, under the South African presidency, the G20 has highly placed solidarity, equality, and sustainability at the core of its agenda, values that resonate deeply with the spirit of the UN charters. Regrettably, our world continues to witness multitude of persistent geopolitical tensions and conflicts. These crises not only lead to the tragic and unnecessary loss of millions of lives, but also impede global economic growth and exacerbate social inequalities both among and within nations. As we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the UN, we are reminded that peace is not merely the absence of conflict, but the cornerstone upon which inclusive and sustainable economic development is built. The vision of the UN aligns with the EU's conviction that silencing the guns and effective conflict resolution mechanisms are indispensable to achieving prosperity. Today, the African Union calls upon the G20 to reaffirm peace as the path that unites the principles of solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Without peace, there can be no shared progress, no dignity, and no sustainable future for sure. Central to ensuring durable peace is the reform of the global governance, as articulated in the G20 call to action on global governance reform that we adopted in this very chamber last year. The G20 must serve as a platform where consensus is forged on pragmatic options to reform the UN Security Council to ensure fairer representation of the world as it is today. The AU has a strong common position on this built on the Zuluni Consensus. To secure durable peace that paves the way to sustainable economic development, the AU urges the G20 to address the the systemic factors that continue to hinder economic development, especially for countries in the global south. At the top of the agenda remains the urgent need to reform the global governance and the international financial architecture, which must be carried out to a meaningful conclusion. The G20 is well placed to advance these efforts. In this regard, the AU applauds, among others, the G20 Cost of Capital initiative under the South African G20 presidency. The G20 must also reaffirm its unwavering support for the global development agenda. Further, the need for to strongly engage in the urgent reform of the multilateral trading system with the World Trade Organization at its core. Today, the increasing challenges in international trade, the resurgence of trade protectionism and proliferation of bilateral trade arrangement is a wake-up call to act swiftly to achieve a free and fair global trade system. On food security, peace and sustainable economic growth cannot be secured in the world where vast segments of the population remain perpetually hungry. We recognize the G20 efforts on food security, notably the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Prosperity, launched under the Brazilian presidency of the G20. Compounding the challenge of food insecurity and an existential threat of climate change, its impact as well already on fuel conflicts and disrupt our food systems. Mr. Chairperson, addressing their challenges requires massive investment and resilient and sustainable infrastructure and energy systems, which are the bedrock of production and prosperity. We commend, therefore, the work of the G20 in advancing equality, sustainable and resilient infrastructure, which aligns closely with Africa's own priority under the Programme of Infrastructure and Development in Africa, PIDA. To further advance infrastructure to sustainable development in Africa, Angola will host a financing summit for Africa's infrastructure development from 28 to 31st October 2025 in Luanda. In conclusion, Chair, the AU emphasized the importance of meaningful engagement with the citizens. Against this backdrop, the work of the G20 engagement groups is crucial, particularly in promoting and reaffirming peace and pathway to sustainable economic development. For Africa, home to 1.4 billion people, achieving durable peace is not merely a vision, it is imperative for a better today and brighter for tomorrow. The G20 possesses both the power and the means to make this a reality. Let us also bring the necessary will take to it. And thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you very much, my dear brother, for that. Just to remind colleagues, it is 3 minutes. We now go to Argentina. His Excellency, Mr. Geraldo Huertan, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Worship of Argentina. You now have the floor.
Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, distinguished guests. 80 years ago, the creation of the United Nations embodied an ambitious aspiration to build an institution that would prevent the recurrence of war and provide the international order with a permanent space for cooperation. Yet today, reality shows that the central promise of peace embodied by the UN remains unfulfilled. The number of active armed conflicts, the multiplication of civilian casualties, and the erosion of trust in the multilateral system compel us to a critical examination. The organization cannot resign itself to being merely a forum for speeches, nor disperse its efforts across so many tasks that it fails to accomplish any of them. It must recover effectiveness in the management of peace and security, shed its biases, and avoid allowing legitimate causes to become banners of political confrontation. The ideologization of the UN distances it from its very purpose and essential mission, preventing it from fulfilling its mandate. The limitations of the UN are neither circumstantial nor accidental. They are structural. Every institutional actor tends, by definition, to reproduce bureaucratic inertia, accumulate layers of procedures, and progressively shift away from its original purposes. The result is a growing gap between expectation and effective outcomes. This has happened within the United Nations. Moreover, peace in the 21st century cannot be defined solely as the absence of war. International stability also requires solid economic foundation. In this sense, the G20 plays an essential role. Without trade and investment, there cannot be sustained growth. And without growth, global politics become fragmented and the international order weakens. Recent experiences make this clear. When the economy erodes, political trust inevitably deteriorates. This is why the mission of the G20 is complementary to that of the UN, to secure the material conditions that make cooperation among states possible and uphold the stability of the international system. Yet something similar to what we observe in the UN has begun to occur within the G20 itself. The proliferation of teams, meeting, and declaration has been accompanied by a troubling lack of concrete responses. If multilateralism, both in the United Nations and the G20, wishes to regain legitimacy, it must confront its fundamental dilemma, the natural deterioration of its virtue. For that reason, each forum and institution must return to its original priorities, establish clear standards of accountability, and concentrate on those issues that no nation can address on its own. And it must do so with realism, recognizing that state will remain the central actor and that institution cannot replace their will but only mediate it. Argentina wishes to work with respect and conviction alongside all the states represented here so that we may fulfill the mandate of our societies and the founding promise of the UN and the G20 to offer a world that is safer and more prosperous. To conclude, Argentina deems it imperative to achieve, without delay, an effective cessation of hostilities in the Middle East that brings an end to violence and secure the immediate release of hostages. Likewise, we issue an urgent call for peace in Ukraine and Russia with the aim of halting the tragic loss of human lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Argentina. We now move to Australia. Her Excellency Ms. Penny Wong, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Australia. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank South Africa for your leadership of the G20 this year, and Australia is pleased to make a contribution on the topic of reaffirming peace as a path to sustainable economic development. 80 years ago, we came together as a world to create the UN, and Australia was there from the start, and we came together because we had a vision, a world in which no country dominates and no country is dominated, where everyone can prosper and where no one is left behind. 80 years on, we meet at a time of great turmoil, great change, more conflict in Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, Myanmar, and we met at a time where there is greater risk of nuclear warfare. In our region, the Indo-Pacific, there is unprecedented military build-up, but transparency and strategic reassurance are lacking. Trust deficits are exacerbated by this uncertainty, increasing the risk of miscalculation. We in this room all know that conflict eats away at economic growth. Conflict eats away at sustainable development. It leaves the most vulnerable behind, and it puts the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals even further out of reach. Peace calls on all of us to play our part, combining both reassurance and deterrence, and in contributing to economic development. It is a collective commitment to ensure no potential aggressor thinks the pursuit of conflict is worth the risk. Australia has tripled our contribution to the UN Peacebuilding Fund, and over the past 12 months we have led a cross-regional group to develop a new declaration for the protection of humanitarian personnel. We know aid workers are dying in record numbers and must be protected. I thank those in this room who have already joined that declaration and urge all to consider signing on. Australia also believes we have a responsibility to contribute to a more equitable future for our region. Our response to global cuts to development funding has been to pivot and to reprioritise, ensuring we respond to the most acute needs. We continue to work to contribute to economic resilience, health and human development in the Indo-Pacific. We proceed on this basis. We believe that we all benefit as we all succeed and thrive. Colleagues, as the UN turns 80, we can celebrate its successes: the eradication of smallpox, reversing ozone layer destruction, lifting infant mortality rates, setting the rules, norms and standards that underpin our modern world, and working to embed human rights. But we know we confront immense challenges: more conflict, more proliferation, climate change, poverty, hunger, displacement. The system has not always represented the interests of all, and reform is needed to ensure the UN better serves us all. This is a room that has enormous economic and strategic weight. We have an opportunity in this time of change to deploy our collective agency, not only to enable peace, but to build prosperity, and perhaps most importantly, to safeguard and build the norms, rules and institutions which enable both. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Australia, for keeping to the 3 minutes rule. We now go to Canada. Her Excellency, Ms. Anita Anand, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada.
Good morning, bonjour. Thank you, Foreign Minister Lamola, for South Africa's leadership of the G20 this year. Alors que nous célébrons
As we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, it's crucial to recall the 3 pillars on which this organisation was founded: peace and security, human rights and development. In a world that's marked by increasing tensions and mounting economic uncertainty, the United Nations has a pivotal role to play.
And faces unprecedented challenges to fulfilling its mission. Our task is to ensure that it is responsive, effective, and focused on those who need it most. All of us, together, shape the UN of the future, one that delivers real results and stands firm in times of crisis. As President Alex Stubbs of Finland stated, each one of us has agency here, and we have to be able to utilize this agency. This is fundamentally important when we think about the UN and its future. Canada continues to see great value in the G20 as a source of momentum for multilateral action, and this year Canada is using the G7 presidency to build global economic resilience and prosperity by strengthening energy security, accelerating the development and responsible use of critical minerals, and making global supply chains more resilient. These priorities can contribute to the G20 agenda. At the end of the day, each of our nations' prosperity depends on economic resilience and trade, and Canada's top priority is to strengthen collaboration with reliable trading partners around the world. But global trade is under pressure, with a rising number of conflicts and complex geopolitical crises testing our economy's resilience. Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine is a stark example. It erodes global food security and energy security with multiplier effects for people who are most vulnerable to volatility, and it actually draws resources away from sustainable economic development. Canada, as the highest per capita donor to Ukraine, continues to call for respect of the UN Charter, for territorial integrity, and a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. This peace has to uphold Ukraine's sovereignty, protect human rights, and reflect the will of the Ukrainian people. We have to collectively call on Russia to end its absolutely unjustifiable and illegal invasion of Ukraine. Turning to the Middle East, this week Canada recognized the state of Palestine. Addressing Gaza's catastrophic humanitarian crisis is also a priority. Canada calls for an immediate and lasting ceasefire, the release of all hostages, the protection of civilians, and more humanitarian aid to reach those in need without obstacles under the UN system. Canada is going to increase our efforts to support strong democratic governance in Palestine, and we are in regular contact with the Palestinian Authority to ensure that it will make good on the promises set forth in the Abbas letter. Finally, I want to turn to the deteriorating situation in Haiti, which has significant consequences on the Haitian people region-wide. I want to say to this room that Canada strongly supports a UN support office to bolster the security mission in Haiti, and we urge international support for the UN Security Council resolution, as well as critical financial and in-kind support, of which we donated or have contingent on the passing of the UN resolution, $60 million. To close, I'm going to emphasize the value that so many of us here today hold, and that is multilateralism. We, like many of you, are committed to multilateral engagement and free trade, but we can only achieve multilateral engagement and unwavering free trade together. Peaceful, secure, and prosperity in terms of economic resilience and security and global protection of that peace is only possible through our collective action. Canada will continue building mutually beneficial and reliable partnerships for trade, for defense and security, and for investment and development. And let us remember, as we mark the UN's 80th anniversary, that reaffirming peace is the surest path to sustainable economic development for all, for today and for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my dear sister from Canada. We now move to China. His Excellency, Mr. Fung Kong, the permanent representative of China to the United Nations, you now have the floor.
Thank you, President. Your Excellency Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola, colleagues, first, it's my privilege to convey Foreign Minister Wang Yi's greetings to all of you. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the founding of the UN and the victory of the World Anti-Fascist War. The global landscape has changed profoundly over the past 80 years. Now, the reform of the global governance system has reached a critical stage. Not long ago, President Xi Jinping put forth the Global Governance Initiative, calling for a more just and equitable global governance system, thereby injecting stability and certainty into a volatile and changing world. In a complex international environment, it is all the more important that the G20 stay united, pursue cooperation, and serve as a constructive force in the changing world. China stands ready to work with all parties in the following aspects. First, jointly safeguarding world peace and stability. We must honor sovereign equality, abide by international rule of law, respect countries' right to choose their own development path and social systems, and resolve differences through dialogue and negotiation. The UN is the central platform for advancing global governance. The G20 should support the UN in playing a central role in international affairs. It should lead by example in upholding the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and seek political settlement to regional hotspot issues. The Ukraine crisis has riveted global attention. China supports all efforts towards peace and looks forward to the conclusion of a fair, lasting, and binding peace agreement by the parties concerned at an early date. On the question of Palestine, the two-state solution is the only viable path forward. China firmly opposes attempts to occupy Gaza. We call for an early ceasefire and an end to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We support Palestine in becoming a full member of the UN. This year marks the African moment for the G20. It is imperative to support the African people in resolving African issues with their own efforts and achieving the African Union's goal of silencing the guns. Second, working to improve global economic governance. We should recommit ourselves to multilateralism and an open world economy, reject unilateralism, protectionism, and all forms of economic bullying, promote trade and investment liberalization and facilitation, and firmly safeguard the multilateral trading system with the WTO at its core. In accordance with the agreed time frame and roadmap, we must advance the World Bank shareholding review and IMF quota realignment to enhance the representation and voice of developing countries. China supports the efforts by the UN and Secretary-General Guterres to promote reform of the global financial architecture. Third, deepening international cooperation on development. We need to strengthen cooperation in poverty alleviation, food security, climate change, disaster prevention control, among others, and help developing countries mobilize more resources, build capacity, and improve their development environment. 2 days ago, right here at the UN headquarters, China successfully held the high-level meeting on the Global Development Initiative. Premier Li Qiang attended and addressed the event. The meeting built new consensus and provided fresh momentum for accelerating the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. China has consistently supported efforts to strengthen global governance and international cooperation on AI. We've proposed the establishment of the World AI Cooperation Organization and stand ready to coordinate closely with all sides to jointly support the AI for Africa initiative launched by South Africa, with the aim of bridging the North-South divide in AI development. This year's G20 summit, to be held for the first time on the African continent, carries profound historical significance. China actively supports South Africa's presidency and will work with all sides to ensure that the summit delivers fruitful outcomes and leaves a significant legacy for building a world of enduring peace and shared prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my dear brother from China. We now move to the European Union. Her Excellency Ms. Kaja Kallas, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Union. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Excellencies. I want to first thank South Africa for convening our meeting today, and with such important focus as peace and sustainable economic development. As the United Nations marks its 80th anniversary, it is clear that reinvigorating multilateral platforms like the G20 is crucial. In a period where we see more conflicts and territorial violations than we have ever seen since the Second World War, we need a UN system that functions. But instead we see cracks in the walls of and stumbling blocks. That is why European Union is here in the New York City to reaffirm our unwavering commitment to effective multilateralism and the rules-based international order with United Nations at its core. Bold reform through UN18 initiative and the implementation of the Pact for the Future is essential. This is not simply papering over the cracks. This will help us work more effectively as an international community across the humanitarian, development and peace nexus. An effective United Nations is also crucial to address ongoing crises in the world today, from the Middle East, Gaza, to Africa, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Great Lakes, and Rwanda. Respect for the UN Charter and international law is the only route to deliver peace and security. Economic development is not sustainable without peace, and Russia's war against Ukraine and the conflict in Gaza remain primary drivers of global instability. During its war on Ukraine, Russia has sabotaged global food supply chains, accelerated ecological disasters, and spread disinformation, including at the highest level in the international fora like this. These actions also systematically destabilize international systems. These actions starkly contradict the G20 South African presidency's commitment to sustainable development as unifying priority. So long as there are no signs that Russia's goal of subjugating Ukraine has changed, I ask you to help build international pressure on Russia to stop killing and engage in meaningful negotiations. There is no bigger champion of a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine than us. The EU is also the largest humanitarian donor and a constant supporter of the Palestinian Authority and the two-state solution. The European Union is for peace. That is why we are also leading supporters of the international peacekeeping efforts across the globe. The EU's member states are leading contributors to the UN peacekeeping budget. We put our money where our mouth is. We also have 21 of our own active common security and defense policy missions and operations deployed in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus, Africa, and in the Middle East. At the same time, we also use our tools to address the root causes and drivers of vulnerability and conflict. Quoting Secretary-General Guterres, a more secure world begins by investing at least as much in fighting poverty as we do in fighting wars. To conclude, the G20 remains an important forum to coordinate responses to global crises. Despite our differences, the G20's efforts, including under South Africa's presidency, have noble goals to support social inclusion, economic progress, and stability to nurture peace. It is essential that we make it work, and you can count on the European Union as a predictable and credible partner here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my dear sister. We now move to France. His Excellency, Mr. Thani Mohamed Solihi, the Minister of State for Francophonie and International Partnerships. You now have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, I'd like firstly to thank the South African presidency of the G20 for convening this meeting, which is happening at a crucial time to reaffirm the importance of the multilateral system and its centre of gravity, the United Nations. There is no sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. We should firstly make the UN system fairer and more representative, and it's in that spirit that France has for many years and clearly and consistently supported reform of the Security Council and broadening out both categories of its members. Alongside Mexico, France has also been leading an initiative which would allow responsible use of the veto by encouraging people not to use it in cases of mass atrocities. And anyone that wants to make that change happen should join us. We should listen to what's been said by the General Assembly, particularly concerning respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and its commitment to the peaceful coexistence of an Israeli state and a Palestinian state. We should also adapt the UN system to the new concerns of member states and emerging challenges. In that regard, France supports the UN80 initiative, which has been launched by the UN Secretary-General, to bolster the effectiveness and impact of our actions in the field for the benefit of populations. Finally, our responsibility is to act against forces that sow division. France brought together the community of the Pact for Prosperity, People and the Planet, the 4 Ps, which now has more than 70 members that want to prioritise collaboration over entertaining the illusion of rifts between imaginary blocs. The G20 should, without further ado, make reforming global governance a reality. France will contribute wholeheartedly to those efforts through its presidency of the G7 next year in this group and with all of its partners. Thank you.
I thank France for your statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Johann Wadephul, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany.
Minister Lamosa, Excellencies, colleagues, thank you, Minister, for convening this timely meeting. Germany fully supports your G20 priorities, and Chancellor Merz looks forward to attending the summit in Johannesburg. The history for my country has taught us the immeasurable value of peace. Peace is, without question, the most urgent topic before us today. We are meeting at a time of overlapping global crisis, when in many regions peace remains fragile or elusive. Think of Ukraine, bravely defending the country's sovereignty against Russia's futile war of aggression. Think of the Middle East, where Palestinian people are suffering from famine and displacement, and where Hamas's hostages are desperately waiting for their release. Think of Sudan, where the most humanitarian crisis of modern times is unfolding before our eyes. These crises cannot be solved by one country alone. They require our joint multilateral response. However, when it comes to multilateralism, we all know the UN at 80 itself is facing an existential crisis. Disagreement among member states increases, while resources are shrinking quickly, and global challenges like climate change and new technologies are waiting to be addressed. Multilateralism globally is under strain. International law suffers an adherence crisis. Most of us agree that the UN needs to become more efficient and effective to be fit for purpose. The question is how to get there. I believe, as the G20 have a shared responsibility to help modernizing the UN as the international organization, also by intensifying our dialogue between G20 and the UN. We carry a common responsibility to promote peace and prosperity. Our Compact with Africa, a South African-German joint initiative, emphasizes the G20's great potential to boost prosperity and to promote peaceful development. We therefore strongly support the ongoing South African work on resilience of supply chains, sustainable development and inclusive growth. As international community, it is our shared task to do everything possible to bring wars to an end in a just and durable way, because we are committed to and believe in a rules-based international order, in a world where we lead by the power of our example, not by the example of our power, because we are convinced that sustainable development cannot be achieved without peace. As the G20 and UN, we can bridge divides, strengthen trust, and show that cooperation, not confrontation, is the only path forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Germany. We now go to Russia. His Excellency, Mr. Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you very much for this initiative, which has now become a tradition, holding a G20 ministerial on the sidelines of the General Assembly. We're meeting in a year when we're going to mark two landmark anniversaries. 80 years ago, with my country playing a key role, we defeated German Nazism and Japanese militarism. The great victory helped us to establish the UN, the United Nations, whose founding fathers sought to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war and to promote social progress. Working on the basis of principles enshrined in the UN Charter, taken in full comprehensively with due regard how they're interrelated, is a way of laying the groundwork for the progressive development of all states without exception, large and small. Refusing to comply with the Charter's principles is an expression of neocolonial ambitions, leading to the rise of global instability, multiplication of regional conflicts. A key example of this is the Ukraine crisis, which was provoked by the collective West. And we also, of course, know the history of colonialism in Africa, where borders were drawn up arbitrarily without any concern for nationality confession. And back to Ukraine, NATO and the EU have basically declared war on my country and are partaking it directly. Similarly, we have the escalation in the Middle East. An unprecedented, horrific humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza has already claimed the lives of 65,000 people. Some UN employees working on Middle Eastern issues have said that there are some assessments according to which the number of victims is 10 times higher. None of Israel's neighbors can feel safe day in, day out. Also, we have unilateral economic sanctions, flagrant violations of the Charter, tariff wars, direct blackmail of trading partners, violations of WTO rules. All of these hit particularly hard the vulnerable, those parts of our societies which are particularly exposed. And on top of that, they pose a grave threat to the global economy through the fragmentation of markets and supply chain disruptions. In December of this year, we will be celebrating the 65th anniversary of the UNGA adopting the UN Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. Without a doubt, what would be in the interests of all of humanity would be the genuine democratization of the world order and of global economic relations. We see a steady increase in the role and the importance of multilateral global governance structures such as the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well. This is evidence of the advent of a multipolar world, an example of equitable diplomacy. The BRICS share in global GDP, according to purchasing power parity, stands at 40%. And even before the membership expansion, it exceeded that of the G7. At the BRICS summit in Kazan in October of last year, we put forward new proposals to establish a new settlement infrastructure, as well as to establish independent stock exchange and investment mechanisms. Work began on the establishment of an SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization Development Bank. These initiatives should bolster the effectiveness of economic cooperation between states of the global majority, shielding them from unfair competition. I'd like to stress the large-scale productive capacity of the G20. The G20, the membership of which reflects contemporary geopolitical realities. After all, it includes new centers of influence which are developing very swiftly, including the BRICS countries and the G7 countries. We're in favor of swift implementation of agreements reached at the G20 regarding the strengthening of the role of the Global South and the East in the IMF and the World Bank, with due consideration for their real clout in the global economy and global finance. What's also important is to revive the WTO as the only recognized regulator of multilateral trade, which we have. At the same time, we believe that the G20 should, and this was what was originally intended, the G20 should focus on economic issues without getting pulled into attempts to prejudge military and political issues on the agenda that are to the detriment of the UN and the UN's Security Council. The motto of the South African presidency of the G20 is Ubuntu, which means I exist because we exist. In other words, what we're talking about is the interconnectedness between different peoples. We hope that the upcoming G20 summit in Johannesburg in November will send a strong signal in tune with this unifying philosophy and will be an important milestone in our endeavor to solve myriad present-day challenges. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Russia. We now go to Indonesia. His Excellency, Mr. Sugiono, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank South Africa for convening this important meeting. At a time of growing uncertainties in which climate change is accelerating, inequality is widening, food and energy insecurity threaten the most vulnerable, and geopolitical tensions continue to destabilize our world. These interconnected challenges development if we want successful cooperation, because without peace, our common agendas become impossible. And no country can address these challenges in isolation. Our strength lies in cooperation through dialogues, partnership, and trust. This is the reason we must revitalize multilateralism with the United Nations at its core. As the UN approaches its 80th anniversary, it needs to become stronger, more effective, and more inclusive, and capable of delivering real and tangible solutions. And for this, and for giving full support to the Secretary General's UN80 initiatives, which calls for greater efficiency, stronger mandate delivery, and closer alignment with the SDGs, is a crucial role that G20 must play. At the same time, we must recognize the urgency of addressing the financing gap. The SDGs require $4 trillion annually, and the absence of innovation and reform will only widen the gap. We need new and innovative sources of finance. Multilateral development banks must be reformed to serve the needs of developing countries. And equally important, we must also address inequality. It is not just a moral failure, but it is also a driver of instability, conflict, and disillusionment. And reducing inequality is the surest path to peace and prosperity. It must be at the heart of our collective agenda. And we have to decide either we allow fragmentation to deepen, or we work together to rebuild trust in multilateralism. Let us build a global order that is fair, inclusive, and sustainable. Thank you.
I thank the Foreign Minister of Indonesia. Now call on the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy, His Excellency Mr. Edmondo Cirielli, to take the floor.
I thank the South African presidency for organizing the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in this open format. We greatly appreciate the inclusive approach. As we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, we strongly need a collectively renewed commitment towards an effective multilateralism as the international community is facing existential challenges. Above all, we should take this opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to the value and the principle of the UN Charter. Firstly, by rejecting the use of force in international relations. We are in the third year of Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine, an attack against the core principles of the UN Charter. Russia must stop its aggression immediately and engage in serious and meaningful negotiations. Unfortunately, we still hear in this room false narrative and misrepresentations. We will spare no efforts to help build a just and lasting peace, respectful of the independence and territorial integrity of Ukraine. The situation in the Middle East is also a source of grave concern. It is urgent to reach an agreement on ceasefire in Gaza and liberation of all hostages by Hamas. We support the ongoing mediation efforts and call on the parties to refrain from action that could lead to further escalation. Italy considers the two-state solution the only possible way to get to a sustainable and durable peace in the Middle East, to offer a future of hope to the entire region, in line with Oslo agreements. Africa is also affected by multiple crises and conflicts. In Sudan, we urge an immediate cessation of hostilities in the catastrophic civil war, to be followed by an inclusive political process to preserve the country's territorial integrity. We also remain strongly engaged in the Sahel to combat terrorism and illegal trafficking, as well as to support rule of law in the region. A stronger partnership with Africa is a top priority for Italy. We are implementing the Mattei Plan, our national initiative closely interpointed with the European Global Gateway, and G7 Partnership for Investment Infrastructure. In addition to the various flagship projects in the 14 pilot countries within the Mattei Plan, we are now launching an initiative for debt swaps in Africa. Funds deriving from the conversion will be used to further finance sustainable development in partner countries. In conclusion, Italy is strongly committed to work in all relevant fora for the stabilization of areas of crisis, promote sustainable development, and address the root causes of displacement and mass migration flows. The G20 has a significant role to play in the respect, and we are ready to further engage within this framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Italy. We now go to Japan. His Excellency, Mr. Takeshi Iwaya, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan.
Thank you, Minister Lamola, fellow ministers, distinguished guests. First, I would like to express my respect for South Africa's effort as the G20 presidency. Today, the international community is facing multiple crises caused by major challenges to the rule of law, notably Russia's aggression against Ukraine, as well as global issues. Against this backdrop, we need to identify common ground and points of agreement rather than division and confrontation, and with that, we should take the lead in solving these issues in a way that all members share responsibility. Japan has been promoting effort in the areas of peace and sustainable development, which are also today's theme, by attaching great importance, guided by the principle of human security. Japan has been taking the lead in addressing global issues such as poverty, disaster, infectious diseases, and climate change. Furthermore, in the age of multiple crises, it has become increasingly important to realize quality growth aligned with the times, which is achieved through, one, strengthening socio-economic autonomy and resilience, including food, energy, as well as economic securities. Two, developing quality infrastructure. And three, efforts in areas such as digital. Japan, as a nation at the forefront of addressing challenges, will share its knowledge on issues such as declining birth rate and aging population, as well as disaster, with the international community. In doing so, Japan will work collaboratively to realize a sustainable economy and society beyond 2030. This was published in this year's Voluntary National Review, VNR, on the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, as well. Japan attaches great importance to disaster risk reduction, critical minerals and debt issues among the priority issues raised by South Africa, the G20 presidency. Regarding disaster risk reduction, Japan will share its expertise and technologies developed through experiencing numerous disasters with the international community. Japan will thereby contribute to reducing risks of and enhancing responses to disasters that have become more severe and frequent. Regarding critical minerals, aiming for stable supply by strengthening the resilience of supply chains, Japan will promote effort that contributes to the realization of responsible critical minerals supply chains. This will be done in a manner that complies with labor standards, ensures measures against bribery and corruption, and considers the impact on the environment. Addressing the debt issues faced by developing countries is critical for sustainable development. It is also important to speed up the debt restructuring process of the G20 Common Framework, further ensure debt transparency, and mobilize private finance. The G20 summit will be held for the first time in Africa this year, and thus cooperation with Africa is important. In August, Japan hosted the 9th Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TICAD 9, which underscored the importance of private sector-led sustainable growth, the empowerment of youth and women, as well as enhanced regional integration and cross-regional connectivity. Japan remains committed to advancing concrete initiatives in partnership with Africa. Japan will advance its cooperation with international organizations, including the UN, at its 80th anniversary, as well as the G20 members, to co-create practical solutions aligned with the times. We will also continue to actively contribute for the successful G20 summit in Johannesburg. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan. We now go to the Republic of Korea. His Excellency, Mr. Chung Hyun, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Korea.
Thank you, Minister Lamola. Excellencies, distinguished guests, I commend South Africa's leadership in bringing us together once again in this chamber. As the United Nations turns 80, we